Hi there. So today we're going to be talking about transfer methods for your first project. So we begin with a piece of illustration board that we previously cut. This is one of the ones that's 10 by 7.5 inches. And to begin, we're going to mark off the edges to create a border. So I'm going to be making a 1/2 inch border. So measuring, just like we did for the cutting method, measuring, just making 2 little pencil marks. Again, you don't want to draw lines because there's no reason. It's just more work for you in the end, more to erase. So all you need is 1/2 inch marks in from each side to give you a guide where you're going to place your blue tape to protect the edges. And this gives just a clean way to work, so your edges are clean, so your borders are even. The straight edge of the tape is wonderful for that. So just following your guidelines, go around each edge, and that gives you the initial border that you're going to be working with. The benefit of that too is it gives you a clearer look at your canvas size, in that when you start to place your objects and make your composition on the final piece, you have a clearer vision of the space you actually have to work with. And these can be lightly bent around the edges just to protect your edges. Okay, so then the next thing is, for this project, if you choose to use the transfer method, because you can draw from life, you can draw directly on your board. So if you were going to look at an object or look at a source and draw straight, you're more than welcome to do that. But for transferring, kind of a nice way to get at least the basic shapes on there before you start is printing out a draft copy, meaning it is clear enough to tell what you're looking at, but it doesn't have to be really using that much ink. So I use the draft mode on my printer, and you're going to place your image where you want it. Okay, and then placing tape only at the top. And the reason is you don't want to have it all taped down, because as you're transferring, you want to be able to lift and see what is transferring on your surface. And so making this hinge at the very top is the best way to go. So you can see I have that where I want it. I also recommend having another printout for when you start working that is, and it doesn't have to be as big, it can be small like I've done, just so you have a more clear reference as you begin to render, to see subtle shifts in light and shadow and things like that. But for the transfer, it doesn't have to be a crazy good copy. So once your image is on, you are going to use some homemade transfer paper. So all I did really was I took a piece of inexpensive tracing paper, and using this pencil, which is a 5B, which is super soft. You can use a 4 or a 5B, and then scribble scrabble away and coat your entire piece of trace with graphite. Now the reason why homemade transfer paper is better is because it's just graphite. So when you're done with your final artwork, it's easier to erase. The store-bought transfer paper can be used, but it tends to have a waxy surface that in the end is harder to get off your final surface, and it can stain and leave marks. The beauty of using homemade transfer paper is it disappears when you're done. So basically, you're just going to slip this in, graphite side down, facing your illustration board. and carefully place under. Try to avoid, as you're working, leaning your hand too hard on it because it'll transfer that too. And to transfer the image, I don't recommend using a ballpoint pen or something like that because that can actually create grooves in the illustration board itself. You can use an art pencil or a regular school pencil, sharpened to a very fine point, but I think a mechanical pencil is really the easiest way because not only do you not have to sharpen it, but it just has a beautiful tip that really transfers well. And as you start transferring, you don't need to shade anything in, although you can outline where a shadow lies, which is sometimes what I like to do. When working on a piece that is realistic, the shadows are just as important as the outlines to make a piece appear more real. And so I'm going to do a few preliminary lines here, and then I'm going to carefully check to make sure the pencil's working for transfer, and it is. And you can always practice on another surface if this is the first time you've ever done it. But it's pretty simple. So you're just going to basically come around your basic shapes to give yourself a guideline before you start rendering in the pen on the illustration board. The pressure doesn't have to be very hard. Oops. You can use just a medium pressure. I'm resting my hand off the piece down here so as to not make smudges as much as possible on my illustration board. But then again, it's just graphite, so it can be erased. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go over my entire image, but just a few of the main lines for you guys to see. Oof, keeps breaking. And as you go, you'll be able to see the areas you have covered and the areas you haven't with the graphite on the Xerox copy, which is helpful. So you're not going over the same lines over and over again. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. So when you're ready to take it off, you want to carefully flip up and don't untape it right away, because in case there's a line or a shadow or something you accidentally missed, that way you can go back and add it without having to re-register your image. If you take it off and then retape it on, there's a chance your image might shift and just creates unnecessary problems. So leave it taped. Take your transfer paper off carefully. And you can see the lines I got just with a mechanical pencil and the homemade graphite transfer paper. And the beauty, again, is because it's just graphite, you can take a trusty kneaded eraser, my favorite because they don't make messes. They're a really clean eraser to use. And when you're ready, after you put all your pen lines down, it erases really well. And any little smudge marks or anything else that gets on there during the process is going to be removed super easy. So I hope that makes sense. And if you have any questions, always ask.